bad will a carbon tax be for Canada's economy? Hello and welcome to another Bourbon and Bullets. Today we're talking about, as you may have guessed, the carbon tax yet again, because it is a big issue and it has serious implications for the future of Canada. Now, before we can answer the question of how bad the carbon tax will be for Canada's economy, let's first look at a place where it's been implemented and where we can look at the results, and that would be British Columbia, the province in which I live. It was brought in by the supposedly pro-business liberal government. Now, for those of you that don't know BC politics, the liberal government here are not, they're called the blue liberals because they're a coalition of the liberals and the conservatives to keep out the NDP. So they kind of go back and forth a bit. Not entirely to the left, but not true conservatives either. Anyway, so Gordon Campbell brought in the the carbon tax here in British Columbia in 2008, and it was a way of heading off the NDP before an election, heading them off at the polls, both figuratively and literally. The NDP at the time actually campaigned against carbon tax. The NDP was actually campaigning for less taxes, if you could believe that one. They lost. They lost terribly in that election because no one believed them. No one believed that the NDP was actually really going to stick to their word and reduce taxes, and they were right because as bad as the policy was, the BC Liberals were generally seen as good for the economy, and they were good for the economy. They eliminated a lot of government regulation. They did reduce corporate taxes. They did reduce personal income taxes. So overall, most of their policies were pretty much pro-business. And of course, carbon tax was an olive branch to the environmentalists, which is kind of a waste of time because they're never going to vote for anything anyways. But I guess they figured the middle class was going to demand that they do something. They do something on the environment. Yeah, as if a tax is going to do anything. All right. So, well, how's it played out? Well, they say that it reduced emissions. Yeah. Okay. Really? They say it's reduced emissions by 5%. This would be a Duke University study. And okay, well, just so that's the study. And you know who conducts those studies is it's left-wing academics who want to get the result that they want. They could only come up with a 5% reduction. However, there was already about a 5% reduction in, in carbon emissions before the implementation of the carbon tax. I think it was about 4.5% in the years before the carbon tax was implemented. And of course, if you remember, oil prices were sky high at that point. They weren't the highest they'd ever been. They were getting close to the early 70s when we had the oil shocks. So that, of course, probably played a factor in reducing emissions. People just didn't drive as much because it was costing too damn much. But based on market demands, there'd been Hurricane Katrina and a few other storms that had reduced refining capacity in the Gulf of Mexico, and so we had a bottleneck of available refined oil and gasoline, and yeah, so supply and demand. This wasn't an artificially imposed tax that raised rates. And since the carbon tax was imposed, they've had about 5%. So really no net gain because prices have dropped on gasoline and oil, and people don't feel the pinch in the pocket quite as much. I mean, they're still paying the carbon tax, which has had a bit of a drag on the economy. I know personally that small businesses, are hurt by that. They do get a rebate, but as I've said in other videos, that businesses and people, they budget monthly, not annually. So the other thing that Horgan, the current NDP government, who snuck in with the help of the Greens, like to tout is that the carbon tax, which they originally campaigned against, has not had a drag on the economy in British Columbia. Well, it hasn't, but I mean, overall, no. I mean, yes, as I say, small businesses have been they feel the pinch. Their margins are reduced, and they are the number one job creator. Small businesses, as much as governments never like to acknowledge that, they are responsible for over 2/3 of the economy. But you also have to look at the economy of British Columbia, which is overwhelmingly dominated by Vancouver, Metro Vancouver. That is the number one economic driver in the province. And they'll say, well, BC is a resource economy. Well, no, not like neighboring Alberta. It's not nearly the resource giant that Alberta is. I mean, back in the day, forestry was the number one industry, and those days are long gone. So it's and major cities are huge economic drivers of the economy, and Vancouver has a huge diverse economy, which in turn backstops most of the provincial economy. So I mean, maybe if we'd brought in LNG that was promised 15 years ago, which would have been great, but has been stymied by just one bureaucratic hurdle after another, maybe you might have an argument there. But we didn't. We haven't built one LNG project since bringing in the carbon tax. After that was one of the reasons. Actually, to back up a bit, yeah, that was actually one of the reasons why the Liberals brought in the carbon tax, because they wanted to promote LNG. So they brought in the carbon tax, and we got no LNG in return. The whole social license argument, which we've seen how that worked out for Trudeau. Social license, and then we'll build oil pipelines. Well, in Trudeau's case, he never really had any intention of building oil pipelines in the first place. Okay, anyway, getting off topic a bit here. Okay, so we look at British Columbia's example, and of course that's going to be held up as the shining example for the rest of the country when we talk about bringing in a national carbon. You're going to hear lots of BC as we come into the election year. I guarantee you, just wait for it. You're going to hear about, oh, they brought in a BC, didn't hurt a darn thing, didn't actually reduce emissions, but it didn't also, they'll claim that it, did the 5% reduction. Well, as I said, we already had that, and didn't do a damn thing to the economy, but it didn't help the economy. So they'll use that as the argument. But of course, when we're talking about truly resource-based economies like Saskatchewan, Alberta, it will be devastating. It's already been devastating in Alberta, where the NDP government there brought in a carbon tax, of course, on top of reduced energy prices already. But still, it's like when your industry is facing a downturn, you don't add insult to injury. You try and preserve those jobs. You try and keep the economy going, which of course left-wing governments never understand. Now, I brought up I think the most illustrative thing we can look at is the 1973-74 energy crisis. Now, we're not going to have an oil shock like we did in the early 70s, because there's actually plenty of oil in the world. That we know, both here in Canada and around the rest of the world. We have a glut of oil, as a matter of fact, and the U.S. is actually ramping up oil production. But artificially impose price increases like the carbon tax. And don't forget, Trudeau, who loves the UN want to go much higher than the $50 per ton that the Liberals have said they will stop. Well, the Liberals have said we have a plan to go to $50, and then they're very cagey about going higher. But Catherine McKenna has already let the cat out of the bag there, saying, yeah, we should go to $500. And I think, as you may have heard in a previous video, I pointed out that Sweden has a $140 per ton carbon tax, which has been devastating to their economy. Their economy manages to keep going for how much longer, we don't know. They are a homogenous community. That's changing, also much to their detriment. And people say, well, what difference does that make? Well, when you're a small homogenous community population, you're all on the same page. There's no difference in community. You're all kind of working for the other guy. You realize that, but you all have the same hopes, desires, dreams. Your families all look alike. Your families all talk alike. Your families all have the same background. I mean, you just do. That's, there's no denying that when you're a homogenous community, it's much easier to get everybody working on the same page and working together. Canada is not a homogenous community. And if Trudeau had his druthers, we'd be a much less homogenous community. We'd be, as he said, he wants Canada to be not Canada, to be a post-national state, not standing for anything. We do have our values, but of course we are a very multi-ethnic community. So trying to get that population, a diverse population across a huge country, separated by thousands of kilometers, to get them to work together on the same plan, despite the economic hardships of carbon taxes and other government regulations, is insurmountable. That is never going to work, and it barely works in Sweden. So, sorry, stick with me. Getting back to the 70s. Well, okay, so that was a market reaction to price increases, but it's the same reaction when you have government imposed price increases. Now, also don't forget that in the early 70s, it wasn't just the energy shock. It was, now people like to talk about Richard Nixon and, the evil Republicans. Well, you forget that before Ronald Reagan came to power in 1980, the Republicans were many times to the left of the Republicans. JFK was much more what we'd call a traditional Republican today than a Democrat. Nixon brought in the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. He brought in massive government regulations, not just environmental regulations, but regulations right across the board. He brought in wage and price controls, okay, in the early 70s. So all that government regulation, all that central government interference in the economy, coupled with the energy price shocks, led to stagflation, led to low productivity, which in turn led to inflation, which in turn led to the central bank trying the traditional method to tame inflation, which is increasing interest rates. But inflation then wasn't based on, usually, inflation's based on an overheating economy. The economy is very productive, lots of people are buying, so there's more demand, so prices go up. And then usually the central bank will then raise interest rates a little bit to try and slow down the economy. People will decide, well, they'll spend less, put more money in the bank, and inflation starts to drop a bit. But when your inflation is not based on productivity, it's just based on stagnation, then you're no longer, it's based on artificial content. It's based on government regulation interfering with the economy. It's based on, high energy prices. So it's not based on productivity. So you keep raising the interest rates. It's not going to have any effect on reducing inflation. So you get stagflation. That, I fear, is where we're going, because we will have, there's no reason for a high energy cost, but the government's going to impose high energy costs. So that's going to have a ripple effect all the way down the line. The liberals do not want to talk about the effect that it's going to have on corporations, not just corporations, businesses large and small, are obviously, they're going to download the cost to the consumer. Now, they said that in their rebates, they'll rebate costs to institutions, universities, hospitals, and other nonprofits. But that okay, that's fine. So that compensates whatever cost they have to download to their users. But obviously, it doesn't help consumers in the private sector. So therefore, you're going to have a reduction in productivity, because when people work and they see that they're earning less, they work less. There's no return. There's no advantage to working more. That's just, Trudeau likes to talk about basic economics. That's the most basic economic factor there is. If people will work harder if they see that they're going to make more money based on their labors. That's economics 101. Not that he would have any clue about that. He's too busy taking drama lessons. So we're going to have these artificially imposed high energy costs through the carbon tax. Plus, we're going to have more interference from the government. Massive regulations stemming from so-called, environmental concerns. But, so that has a huge interference in the economy. And then we have the growth of the central government because of all these regulations and this carbon tax and the rebates and everything, which is a formula that they haven't even worked out how it's all going to work. That's going to be another army of bureaucrats in Ottawa on top of the ridiculous army of bureaucrats already there gumming up the works. So you have a completely inefficient economy. And, the economy is doing well. Well, it's hardly on fire, but we're already seeing interest rates get bumped up because they're worried about inflation. And the inflation, as I pointed out, that we're seeing, just like we saw the inflation in the 70s, is not based on high productivity. It's based on a stagnating economy, and artificially prices being jacked up through government interference. The businesses have to download the cost of doing business to the consumer because of regulations and artificially imposed costs by government. Well, if you think that's a good model for a healthy country, for a healthy economy, think again. The United Kingdom, where the term stagflation was first coined in the late 60s, was rocked by strike after strike all through the 70s. The economy almost completely shut down. There was currency controls in the United Kingdom in the 1970s, meaning that you couldn't take more than £1,000 out of the country. How would you like that? You want to go for a trip? Well, better not cost more than, say, $2,000 Canadian, because that's all we're going to let you take out of the country. Because of the flight of capital. When you destroy your economy, well, of course, what happens is capital is fluid and it wants to go places where it could be more effective instead of being taxed to death. So again, the country, one of the consequences of massive government interference in the economy is that you've got to stop the capital flight, which of course just creates more insecurity in the economy as a whole. Because no one's going to invest in a country where once you invest in it, you can't get your capital back out. And of course, it means that people will go to more lengths to hide their capital. It means that people will be less likely to pay taxes because they're trying to hide what they have from the government, hang on to what they have. So you get what happens? Government raises taxes more. They say they see revenues falling, they raise taxes more, and of course, people hide more. It's been shown. I mean, this is what the Reagan Revolution had at its core, was that if you have a fair tax system, you actually increase revenue because people just pay it. People see it as fair, and they work hard, and they will pay, the percentage of. I mean, it should be a flat tax, I think, but okay, that's probably never going to happen, unfortunately. I mean, Bernier might bring in something like a flat tax, or a 2 or 3 tax bracket rate, which would be wonderful. And I guarantee you, if they ever did and massively simplified the tax code and got rid of about the 30,000 bureaucrats working at the CRA, which are completely unnecessary, we would see increased revenues and a booming economy. As you do everywhere, a simplified tax plan has been introduced. Hong Kong had a 15% tax. Have you ever seen a stagnant economy in Hong Kong? They have no resources, but they have no problem having a flourishing economy. Same for Singapore. So there you go. How bad is a carbon tax for Canada? It's really bad. If you listen to the CBC, oh, this is great policy. Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't see any problems with hiring, 100,000 bureaucrats and sort of this unworkable system of rebates and measuring how much energy people are really using, and nonprofits versus private enterprise and how they're compensated, and all the different calculus on how we're going to work out that formula. No problem, because government is always good at working out those types of complex systems, aren't they? Yeah, we have plenty of evidence of government working out complex economic systems. Yeah, just sure. As I said, the simpler you make the economic system, the more prosperity you have. That's undeniable. But no. Anyway, so CBC propaganda will be trumpeting the virtues of carbon tax, and you, my listeners, my fellow Canadians, are going to have to listen to that propaganda while you struggle to decide whether you're going to pay for heating or food. And hoping that at the end of the year you get a sufficient enough rebate check to, I don't know, maybe take that trip to Mexico that you always want to do, alleviate some of the suffering, or buy your kids some new clothes, or but how dare you, miserable little polluting sinners? How dare you ever have hopes and aspirations beyond just eking out an existence? I mean, yeah, Justin Trudeau, sure, he's got a multi-million-dollar trust fund and has lived in a mansion his entire life, but he knows what's best, because he's wagging his finger at you darn little polluting sinners. You should know what's best from Mr. Trudeau, because yeah, he doesn't lead by example, but still, if you don't believe him, listen to Climate Barbie. She's out there pricing expensive Teslas. I mean, just go buy yourself a Tesla. I mean, I'm sure we've all got $70,000, $80,000 to get an entry level model, right? No problem. Problem solved. All right, as usual, I'm trying to prevent an intelligent economic argument, and now I'm ranting about Trudeau. This is usually the case in these videos, but anyway, some of you say that a little rant never hurt anybody, so I hope you still agree. All right, I'm going to leave it there. I hope that made some sense. It was a little bit tangential at points, but Maxime Bernier is coming to Vancouver in November, so I'm going to hope to meet him. Hope to maybe even get him on the channel and say a few words. He's right now arguing on Twitter with Evan Solomon, the CBC, or no, I guess he's with CTV these days, the CTV propagandist for the Liberals, talking about how all scientists have proven that a carbon tax works. There's a couple things wrong with that. Scientists don't know anything about economics, and there's no way that they can prove the carbon tax works. There is no evidence of that whatsoever. So, other than just fudging the data, which is, well, that's usually what they do when it comes to all things climate related. They're also criticizing him for calling carbon dioxide plant food. Well, if you know your basic science, you know that that's true. But hey, if you're on the right, you can't point out basic science without being called any number of names, because that goes against the official narrative. But anyways, that's probably a whole other let's call it a pod. I never know what to call these things, podcast or a video or whatever you want to call it. But that's a whole other episode, anyways. So I'm going to leave it here for today. I hope you managed to last the whole way through. If you did, thank you very much. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you want to drop $1 or $2 in the virtual tip jar, you can via PayPal or Patreon. Links in the description. And until next time, this has been Bourbon and Bullets.